Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kate O'Dell and Kim Strassel. And the other news on the weekend, political news, the Democratic National Committee voted overwhelmingly to revise its presidential primary nominating calendar for 2024 at the request of President Biden. Iowa, which has for 50 years been the first state, the Iowa caucuses, they're now going to be way back in the pack. In New Hampshire, which has been the first primary for something like 100 years, I read 1920, they're going to be relegated to second. And South Carolina, the state that salvaged Joe Biden's presidential campaign in 2020 by saving the Democratic Party from Bernie Sanders. They're going to be first. South Carolina goes number one. There'll be now primary on February 3rd, New Hampshire and Nevada 3 days later, February 6th. Georgia, another very favorable state for Biden, on February 13th. Michigan, another state that Biden won in 2020 on February 27th. And then everybody else can kind of trail whenever they want to do it, Kim. I mean, sometimes the news is right in front of your face as to the justification. What do you think?
Yeah, the press doesn't really want to talk about this. And if you listen to the DNC, they just have all these grand reasons for why they're doing this. It's just time and overdue to shake up the calendar, and for all kinds of reasons that have to do with justice and the truth and the American way. I mean, look, this is so incredibly obvious what is going on here. Biden's getting ready to run again, and they're going to stack the primary calendar in a way that eases his path. Look, he finished fourth in Iowa in 2020. He finished fifth in New Hampshire, because those are states, by the way, where you have to do a lot of retail campaigning. You got to go to diners, you go to little town halls, you shake hands, you meet people all day long. It's very clear that Democrats do not want their 81-year-old nominee having to be in such a situation. And the new calendar instead favors him in this regard. These are all states that are going first. Most of them, New Hampshire's still up there in the beginning, but a lot of the rest of these states are ones where you can rely a lot more on stuffing a lot of money into the advertising markets down there, campaigning on TV, have a lot more set events where the president can give speeches off of a teleprompter. That's a big thing. And then also no chance for him to go around and make a lot of mistakes on these impromptu meetings that you would have out there. So this is being done to give the president a boost.
Hard to have a teleprompter in a restaurant.
Yes.
But I mean, one of the explanations by the party is that, well, New Hampshire's too white, Iowa's too white, doesn't represent the broader Democratic base of the party. Now, that's actually true demographically. But note the irony that Iowa, the Iowa caucuses in 2008, were the state that catapulted Barack Obama into the race in a major way, in a way that led to his defeating Hillary Clinton. And the history of Iowa and New Hampshire is that they have been places where candidates who were obscure, didn't have a national following, could spend some time, weeks if need be, and because of the relatively small size of the electorate, make an impression and then break through either personally or with an issue set. I mean, Gene McCarthy is the most famous example in New Hampshire against putting the Democratic Party anti-war message front and center by giving LBJ a scare in New Hampshire. Jimmy Carter in 1976 going on to win the Democratic nomination with his showing in Iowa. Pat Buchanan in 1992 foretelling the trouble that George H.W. Bush would have winning re-election. If you take those two places out, put them back into the also-ran status, what you do is you foreclose or limit that opportunity for somebody who can make that impact, Kate.
Right, Paul. And I think the flip side of that is that what we're describing is Biden trying to avoid having to confront any of his potential weaknesses as a candidate. And there are reasons why you would want to know soon, if early on in the primary season, if Biden is not aligned with the mood in the electorate and is going to struggle in a general election. I'm not surprised by this move, but if you recall too, the DNC changing the rules for Hillary and superdelegates to stave off a strong challenge from Bernie Sanders from Vermont, you would think they would have learned something about that and perhaps Hillary was not as strong of a candidate as they thought because she had it all locked up. So I think there are real downsides too, even for the Democrats, if they aren't aware that Joe Biden is going to be as strong a candidate as he might think he is. But again, the goal here is to push him across the finish line no matter what, because there are so few other contenders. I mean, his vice president is Kamala Harris, whose campaign really flamed out fast and furious when she tried in 2020. There's no real alternative. So the goal here is to just prop him up at all expense.
The timing of this is fascinating, too, because the polling that has come out of late shows that even most Democrats, now not Republicans or independents, most Democrats would prefer to have another nominee in 2024. Washington Post ABC poll over the weekend said 58% of Democrats would prefer another nominee. There's another poll coming out here on the eve of Biden's State of the Union address on Tuesday from the AP and NORC, Center for Public Affairs Research, that shows just 37% of Democrats say they want him to seek a Senate term, and that's down sharply from 52% before the midterms. Kim, I don't know what those polls suggest, but we don't know if they're fleeting or they'll stick, but they certainly do suggest some vulnerability.
Well, and I think that further explains why the DNC has done this, because you can look at this and suggest that the reason they're doing it is to help Biden in case he ends up with a challenger, right? We still don't know. There might be somebody younger in the party who is ambitious, who decides to challenge him, especially given those numbers. He doesn't have the worst approval numbers of all time, but they're certainly not good. This is the situation Carter found himself in 1979 when he was challenged by Ted Kennedy. So the other reason you could think for doing this, though, is even if he doesn't get a challenger, they do know that a lot of the party isn't sure that they really want him to run again. So what do? You set up a primary calendar in which the best shot the president has of looking as though he's united folks around him are the states that go first. Right. And that is definitely South Carolina. Just a fun fact, when Joe Biden ran in 2020, it was his third time running for president. He hadn't won a single primary or caucus until he got to South Carolina on February 29th. And people had really written him off. He's also got a lot of strong allies down there. Jim Clyburn, who's very senior in the House, Black American politician, really did help him out with the Black vote in South Carolina and in places like Georgia. So, maybe this is also kind of a show there because it's all sort of designed to just make it look as though he's a lot more powerful than he is.
One question is whether this will stick. There's still some complications here. New Hampshire has a state statute that says that it must be the first primary in the country. And, of course, they have a governor who's Republican, Chris Sununu. I think the state legislature is also a Republican majority. They are not going to cooperate with this DNC calendar. They may jump the queue and decide, well, we'll just get ahead of February 3rd. And then what happens? I think the DNC then might downgrade the New Hampshire primary, or at least even if it's held, they'll dismiss it because they'll say, well, those soreheads in New Hampshire just don't like the fact that we're not taking them as seriously as we should. And they think that. And so they'll kind of glide right past that. The other potential problem is Georgia, where the primary calendar set by Brad Raffensperger, a Republican who is the Secretary of State. And I don't think he's going to play ball with the DNC either.
No, that's a good point. I mean, in New Hampshire, they have a lot of pride in this tradition and take the duty of evaluating the candidates somewhat seriously. So you could see them try to retain their first in the nation status. And also, this Democratic spin can be whatever they want. But if Biden doesn't do well there, I think, or as well as he could, or if somebody kind of breaks through, it still creates a problem for him. So I do think that I'm not sure that this rewrite is going to hold. But I think that's why it's so important to talk about the real reasons that they want to do this, because the cudgel is that Democrats are using are that this is about diversity and equity and getting more diverse demographic voices represented. So I think exposing it as a power play is important because they will attack anybody. They'll attack Georgia if they don't play along as going against those reasons.
Well, I think we're learning that there was a reason that Joe Biden put Pete Buttigieg into the cabinet, keep him on the team instead of outside the tent doing you-know-what. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch, but maybe this will not be the walk to renomination as easy as Joe Biden and his team think. All right. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Kate. Thank you all for listening. We're back every day with Potomac Watch, so please check us out tomorrow for another edition of this vaunted podcast. Thanks for listening.